Good afternoon, and welcome to Black Press USA Live. Today, we have a very special guest, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You may know her as AOC. She's a third-generation Bronxite, educator, and organizer serving the 14th District of New York in the Bronx and my hometown, Queens. Ocasio-Cortez grew up experiencing the reality of New York's rise in income inequality, inspiring her to organize her community and run for office on a progressive platform with a campaign that rejects corporate PAC funds. Since her swearing in to Congress in January of 2019, AOC has remained committed to serving working class people over corporate interests and advocating for social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. Today, joining me also is our great publisher from the Washington Informer, Denise Roloff Barnes. Welcome, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So we know we only have a limited time, but so I want to jump right in on the issues. I'm sure Denise has some questions too, but we just got a ruling from the Supreme Court that President Trump's financial records could be accessed by New York, and there's a path for Congress to also access them. How big is that?
Mm-hmm. How big is that path? Well, I think first of all, the opening of the door and the allowing of New York prosecutors to access Trump's taxes, I think is a huge step forward. Even from day one of his campaign, although it has been a normal precedent set for quite some time for presidential candidates to release their taxes for scrutiny. Trump was the first to really break with that tradition in a very, very long time in modern history. And even from the very beginning, before he was even president, people were raising alarm bells. The reason we ask for the taxes of presidential candidates to be made public is precisely for this reason, is precisely to see and to certify that there aren't any outstanding financial conflicts of interest, that there aren't any kind of indications that a candidate could even be extorted in some way, or that there's even a conflict of interest at all. And the fact that the president has hidden it from day one is an issue, but it turns out, as time has gone on, that he very well may be implicated in a crime, and that his taxes may further implicate him in criminality of a financial nature. And that has huge consequences for our governance. And so I think that it's a great development. I think that there is a path for Congress to obtain it as well, which can help us with oversight. It's just a matter of walking down that path.
Yeah, absolutely.
Congresswoman, I just wanted to ask in that regard. I mean, the president has claimed that this is a witch hunt, that it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, that we're going down a road that really has no end because there is nothing there to find. Is there anything is there something there that the Congress is aware of that even makes this, or the courts are aware of, that makes this worth the time, the energy, and the taxpayers' dollars?
Well, we do have testimony that there is a there. While some people may speculate about foreign connections and Russia and all of these things, ultimately, the things that he has been directly implicated by even Michael Cohen, who was his personal attorney for some time, are financial fraud and tax evasion. Just earlier last year, Michael Cohen came before the Oversight Committee and testified in a line of questioning that I had presented to him that Donald Trump overinflated his assets for insurance purposes, and he undervalued his assets to avoid taxes. And both of those things are a crime. It is financial fraud. And depending on how much he did it, how often he did it, Michael Cohen indicated that this was a pattern of underinflation and overinflation across multiple different properties and assets. This could be a financial crime on the scale of tens of millions of dollars, if not more. And that is enormous, because once you have that hung over someone's head, if anybody has access to that data, it could be used as a source of blackmail. It could be used as you know, it could be, even if it's not used as a source of blackmail, it in and of itself is a crime. And it's likely one of the reasons why Trump tried to hide his taxes to begin with while he was running for president, because if he was implicated in a crime, clearly that would have been a massive factor potentially at the polls.
Back into Stacey, I just want to ask, I mean, putting Trump aside, there's an election coming up and there are future elections. Is there any effort or action on the side of Congress to avoid this type of scenario in the future?
Well, you know, we have passed, the House has passed H.R. 1, which is a sweeping electoral reform bill that I think could start to chip away at the power of big money and dark money, but I don't think it goes far enough. I do believe that throughout Trump's tenure, he has shown that many of the customs that I'll call them, that we took for granted, were not law. You know, they were simply reinforced by social pressure, precedent, historic tradition. But the moment a person comes along and says, I don't have to listen to that tradition, or I don't have to honor that precedent, it really forces us to examine what should be law. I personally believe that if you are running for taxes, you need to if you are running for president, you need to disclose a certain amount of years of taxes. And there may be a debate if it should be 10 years, if it should be 20 years, but I do believe that we should be examining that as part of the law. And I also believe that such an effort is likely to gain support in Congress.
Yeah, and just briefly stand on the president for a moment, because I want to get to your accomplishments. You and the squad have accomplished so much in less than two years in office. But the commentations, the pardons, how troubling is that?
Oh, it's extremely troubling. It's extremely troubling because the message that Trump is sending to his accomplices is that if you commit a crime for me, then I will let you off the hook. And he sent that message. He sent that message quite a few times. He sent that message with Sheriff Joe Arpaio when he went to jail, you know, surrounding quite a few abuses that he did as a sheriff in Arizona. And then he's only stepped up. It's only gotten more and more and more serious since then. And that, you know, he let Arpaio go on abuses that he had done against quite a few people as sheriff and as a sheriff. But now we're up to Roger Stone, where he was convicted on about 7 counts, I believe it was, and one of them including lying to Congress. And to commute his sentence is to say, I will cover up the crime for you. You are loyal to me, and I will pay you back. And what that does is that it completely erodes the rule of law at the highest level.
Yeah. Denise, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I'm moving still as it relates to the courts. I mean, now the big story is the number of judges that Trump has appointed over the 3 or so years that he's been in office. Something we've written about in the Black press as we looked at these judges and realized that few, if any at all, you know, were people of color, no Black judges. How did this get to this point where now it's an issue and it hasn't been up to now? And how can the president discriminate against people?
Yeah, you know, frankly, I think that the courts are a huge motivating factor as to why President Trump won to begin with. You know, the evangelical vote, I should say the white evangelical vote, is very, very mobilized around overturning Roe v. Wade. And there are there are many other kind of factions within the Republican Party that are highly motivated towards taking over the courts, from the Supreme Court to appellate courts, all the way up and down. And the reason for that is because there's quite a few unconstitutional and frankly, unjust laws that they're trying to pass, and they need judges to uphold a lot of these very troubling laws that they're passing. And so the courts have been the prize for people in the Republican Party for decades. And frankly, Trump was kind of their devil's bargain, where they sold their soul, and what they were getting in return were the courts. They'd say, we will deal with a candidate who is a sexual assaulter. We will deal with a candidate who is outwardly racist. We will deal with a candidate who is corrupt and likely implicated in crimes if he gives us our judges, because the impact of these court appointments will last a very, very long time, far beyond any present presidential administration. And, they have captured the Supreme Court, and that was their prize. And so, that is what they had wanted from Trump. And of course, the kind of justices that are going to uphold discriminatory laws, unsurprisingly, are overwhelmingly white, and Republican and conservative. It's somewhat difficult to find Black judges that will uphold discriminatory law. And so, and other justices of color as well. At the very early on, Trump said he was alleging that one of the nominated judges, or that a given judge in a case was unqualified because he was quote unquote Mexican when he was Mexican American. And so, or rather that he was biased simply because he was a person of color. And, if you think people of color are implicitly biased against your agenda, maybe it's your agenda that's the problem and discriminatory.
Well, the president obviously has attacked you personally, like he has so many others. You recently tweeted, and I'm reading from it now, which I thought was phenomenal. You've become this rock star, but you've tweeted that you are actually canceled. It says that people who are actually canceled don't get their thoughts published and amplified in major outlets. This has been a public service announcement from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Does that help you and your colleagues? Because specifically, I mentioned the squad. He has come after you guys. Is that the thought process too when he comes after you?
Well, I think there's just an aspect of it's just not a coincidence that every person that Trump targets with the most vitriol, most personally, is almost always a woman of color. And that goes not just for us as members of Congress, but it also goes for journalists. You look at the journalists in the White House press pool, the ones that he treats most disrespectfully, the ones that he goes after, attacks their integrity the most, are almost always Black women and women of color. And it's no surprise that he took a similar approach here with us in Congress. He wants to send a message that we do not belong. And the fact of the matter is, we do. We don't belong in his vision of America, but we belong in the reality of America. And I think that this targeting of his is discriminatory, but also it riles his base the most. We are at the intersection of misogyny, of race, of ageism, of suburban, rural, of geography, and I think that all of these things intersect in what is red meat for his base.
Yeah. Go ahead, Denise.
Congresswoman. Yeah. On that note, we're the Democratic Party is now on the or has the opportunity to name either the first woman or the first woman of color or the first Black woman as vice president. Have you been involved in that decision or advised in any way or what is your opinion as it relates to who that selection should be?
Yeah, I have not been advised personally by the vice president's team on this decision. I do think that that whoever this woman is, it's extraordinarily important that she be progressive. Ideally, frankly, more progressive than the vice president is. And I don't think this is an unusual arrangement or request. In fact, I would say that this is what President Obama did. When he was selecting a vice president, it wasn't just a complement of identity or geography. He also sought out, Barack Obama, President Obama, he was running as one of the more progressive candidates in that field. And he wanted to, politically, Biden was to his right at that time. And it was a counterweight politically and racially, geographically, et cetera. And I think that the vice president should have that political counterweight, especially since especially since the president was, the vice president has kind of locked in the nomination before the coronavirus really hit. I believe, what we've been seeing in polling is that Americans have actually gotten even more progressive in the middle of this pandemic. They've seen firsthand the lunacy of your health insurance being completely dependent on your employer. They see why we should be guaranteeing universal basic income for a lot of folks. They see housing reform. And so I think it would be really important politically in terms of the substance of this candidate, that they be to Biden's left and that they have a very thorough understanding of policy.
Yeah, along those lines. Oh, I'm sorry, Denise.
One follow-up though. Are you satisfied that the list of potential women, that there are some, unless you want to name them, that there are progressives within that list? Are you satisfied that they're represented?
I do think that from the names that we've seen kind of floating around, that there are good choices in there. And of course there are many. Sometimes I feel like we're hearing a new a new cycle every week of a different individual. But I do think that there's definitely some solid choices in there.
Well, and along those lines, when Senator Sanders was running, there was talk that maybe it reached you, but there was talk that he would potentially consider you as the vice president. Is that something that you had discussed with anyone, or is that something you would even be interested in?
Well, I'm not old enough. I'm legally, thank gosh, I am legally prohibited from being a factor in this conversation. I have enough on my plate, but it's an honor to even be asked. But I think we have plenty of incredible people, and also I'm the new kid on the block. I think I need a little bit more experience before even considering something like that. But I think it's an honor to be considered part of any administration, at such high a level. Yeah.
And we know that you had demonstrated many passions in your voting and your time on Congress so far. We know that the situation with the Dreamers is certainly among them. So can you update our viewers on the status of Dreamers and whether any further further damage can be done in the remaining months of this term for this administration?
Yeah, well, the House has passed the Dream and Promise Act. Now, granted, it like many other pieces of excellent legislation have been waiting at Mitch McConnell's feet. He refuses to pick it up. And so as long as that is the case, we have so many young people and mixed status families that are in danger from this administration. And that is really, when people say and ask me, how are you going to pass this or how are you going to pass that? I tell them, we got to win the Senate and the White House. That is our legislative strategy for getting this stuff passed, because I can't sit here and sell false hope to people that that we are going to pass sweeping and just immigration reform under President Trump. It's just not going to happen. And that's why our legislative strategy right now is our electoral strategy, which is making sure that we put in the work to take back the Senate and the White House.
Yeah, absolutely. Denise, go ahead. I think we lost your Denise.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I don't control the sound here, but there are two, of course, the two looming big issues, of course, is COVID-19 and also, what's happening with police reform. And I know that New York has been ground zero for both of those issues. And I'm just curious about, you've sort of seen a change in New York, but are you satisfied, of course, despite the lack of leadership by the president, but what's happening on the ground in your district?
Yeah, it's funny you ask, because just this morning I was out in Corona, Queens, which was one of the most heavily impacted zip codes in the country, and I was handing out food to hundreds of people that were in line. And so the answer is no, we haven't done enough, not on any level of government. The state hasn't done enough. And the federal government certainly has not done enough. And we're in really, really big trouble, because right now, I think a lot of leaders are just trying to force through a reopening and pretending like none of this damage has actually happened. They're pretending that 30 million people, if not much more, are unemployed right now. They're pretending that even folks who are employed aren't being paid at a lower rate, or that their hours have been cut, or that they're underemployed. They're pretending as though 100,000 people haven't died of this pandemic. And they're pretending, even with the reopening of Disney World in Florida, they're pretending that states, and they're acting as though states aren't surging right now as we speak. We had a monumental day from a public health perspective in terms of our first day of 0 deaths due to COVID in the state of New York in quite some time. But we still have 1 in 4 renters that have not been able to pay rent in full. We have millions of families across the country that are facing food insecurity. And this idea that if we just pretend the economy is going to be okay, it will be okay. And by the way, this is completely political, because we're having a run up to a general election, and we want to pretend that everything is fine in order to keep sending the same people in. And the fact of the matter is, we need very real substantive change. We have the HEROES Act, which has passed the House, that is waiting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Expanded unemployment insurance is set to expire in just a few days. So for people who are receiving unemployment, they're about to get another $600 that are going to be deducted from their unemployment insurance if Republicans don't want to play ball and continue providing expanded relief to people. So we're in a lot of trouble if Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump don't pass substantive relief. And even here in New York, on the state level, I believe that that the state legislature and the governor should pass a budget that raises taxes on the very, very, very wealthy, who have been, frankly, profiting off of this very pandemic while the rest of us have been suffering.
And so, Congresswoman, I'm sorry, I thought Denise had a follow-up, but one of the other things that I noticed is come to light that racism and sexual assault in the U.S. military is rampant, and I know you've been speaking about that. What needs to be done from a Congress's point of view?
Well, I think similar to what we are seeing with police shootings, it's very important that we bring individual stories to light, because they open the door and they teach people about the brokenness of the systems and where our systems break down. And like we're seeing in Texas with the disappearance and the murder of Vanessa Guillen, we are seeing that not enough action was taken, that there seems to have been, and there seems to be, a culture of cover-ups, of encouragement of unhealthy behaviors and actions, and multiple families are now coming forward saying that their child suffered or had passed away or went missing in Fort Hood. And so, I think the first thing that we need to do is demand a congressional investigation into Vanessa's story. We need to have a congressional investigation into potentially Fort Hood in general. And with that investigation, I think we may start to pull at the thread that starts to unravel a lot of things that are wrong with this system. And by the way, I think that these two examples are very closely tied, because I believe that policing in a city budget is very similar to defense spending on a federal budget, which is that we divest from community investment, we divest from education, from healthcare, from infrastructure investment, and we take that money away in order to continue a soaring and almost unlimited military defense budget that goes unaudited, that is secretive, and for millions and millions of people have no idea what it's actually going to. And so, the core principles underlie both of those kinds of debates. And I think it's extremely important that we question our budgetary priorities.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to let the Congresswoman go, but I want Denise Rolock Barnes of the Washington Informer, our great publisher there, to get the last question in.
I don't know whether to go. I don't know whether to go with voting or census, but I think I'm going to ask about census. I mean, both of them are requiring everybody, particularly yourself, Congresswoman, and others, to try to influence people to be counted on both sides. So, I mean, what we don't hear much about the census. We've got until October. We've got an election coming up in November. What is the GOTV or GOTC, get out the count effort, by you and your jurisdiction?
Yeah, and it's our census efforts, the thing that's, as life tends to work, you plan and plan and plan, and then something comes up and it can derail certain things. So actually, we were planning for a huge kind of census rollout operation. And in fact, here in New York, our census questionnaires were mailed pretty much the week of or the week before COVID and the lockdowns really started to happen. And so the census is famously a very community-driven, in-person type of effort. People knock on your door. There are street festivals to build awareness. We try to help people fill out their questionnaires in person. And this is so important for our communities, especially Black communities, Latino communities, communities of color, immigrant communities. It's so important that we fill out the census. It's historically, we have historically been undercounted for a ton of reasons. But one thing that I think is really important, one message that I think is really important to get across, is that your census information is completely confidential. It does not matter your housing status. It doesn't matter if you are living in, and I want to speak directly to this, it doesn't matter if you're living in, let's say, in illegal dwelling. It doesn't matter if you owe child support. It doesn't matter if you have a warrant. It doesn't matter if you are undocumented. It doesn't matter if you're in debt. None of that information, of your census information, is shared with anybody. It is not only illegal, but it is an immense crime for anyone at the Census Bureau to leak personal information. And so your information is completely safe. It is totally confidential. And the reason it's so important that we fill it out is because that's how city, state, and federal governments know how to send resources to our communities. They don't get a list of names and addresses, but they do get but we do receive the count of how many people live in a certain community, what their incomes are, how many children are in a special area. And that's what helps us fund schools, fund infrastructure, and more, you know, Medicaid, Medicare. And if we cannot fund a school if we don't know that your child exists. We cannot fund a hospital if we don't know that you exist. And these decisions, these count decisions, are really important because they help us decide how many, where to put a hospital, where to put a clinic, where to put a school, and where to invest in communities. And so we need to count every single human being on U.S. soil, including the undocumented. The census is written into law. It mandates that every single person get counted, and that information, in order to count everybody, we keep that information completely confidential.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you. And speaking of our vice presidential candidates, on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we will have Representative Val Demings, who is certainly a candidate. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We really appreciate you and all you do. This is Black Press USA Live. And thank you, Denise Roloff Barnes of the Washington Informer. Everyone stay safe and stay well.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both.
All righty.